Hey folks, my name is Siraja Rahim. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to episode 2 of our podcast series. I am here with my co-host, Brenda of In.Visible Paradigms. I will let her introduce herself. Brenda.
Hola comunidad. I am so excited to be here. I am the founder and CEO of In.Visible Paradigms, where we facilitate transformative spaces for white allies and majority white organizations. This conversation is particularly exciting for me, and I'm looking forward to sharing, learning from Suraja as I always do, but sharing some of our insights and strategies maybe on how to work through this document, whether it's the first time or you're in the middle of it with a partner. I'll pass it over.
I'm looking forward to learning and working with you too. I feel like that was one of the biggest joys of creating the Reciprocal MOU together was our collaboration, and I think our collaboration really informed our final product. Today we are going to be talking about kind of how this reciprocal MOU came into being, how we kind of initially conceptualized this project, and sort of just the why it looks the way it looks, and what we hope the components that we've selected, because it's not like you can cover everything that falls under a partnership, but we wanted to cover some essentials that would really influence your work. Why we chose those final kind of components that went into the reciprocal MOU.
Absolutely. And I think let's begin with what a memorandum of understanding really is, because that was the template that we started this document with. So an MOU, I have heard of this in my nonprofit experience, but I still meet people that haven't experienced what an MOU is. Basically, it's a type of agreement between two or more, so it could be bilateral or multilateral parties. It's to express a convergence of will between parties, meaning we're coming together willingly to achieve X, and these are the parameters of that. And I was really struck by the nature of an MOU that carries. And also, I had to do a little bit of an internal check to see why my body was tensing up every time I heard an MOU, because it sounded so legal. It sounded like a contract. It sounded like a binding commitment. And to some extent, it is a commitment. Though there's no, we want that, but we don't want, I think when Suraj and I was starting it, we didn't want it to be just any MOU that you see out there, because there are specific legal clauses and blurbs and sentences, and I feel very intimidated whenever I look at those things. But we wanted an MOU that was about a commitment, about this convergence of people coming together, but offering what it means to come into a reciprocal relationship through our lenses and experiences in our identities, and in our positions in business, with the hope and dream that this MOU is unlike any other that we've seen, but that it is fruitful and generative to the gamut of uncomfortable to exciting conversations. And discomfort in invisible paradigms is a catalyst for something. It's not necessarily the feeling or behavior that means that we need to stop something. So it's always worth looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Sarah?
I think that one of my experiences was in providing technical assistance to lots and lots of people who are doing violence prevention work. And as I was reading through people's MOUs and kind of helping people create MOUs, one of the things that I would think sometimes is like, this does not feel actionable. Like they have not shared enough information with each other to achieve the results that they're hoping for, which is like nobody wants that. Like nobody wants to pour a lot of effort into creating a document together, only to find that you can't really serve each other's purposes or support each other in the way that you hope for. And so one of the things that happened when we first started making this, I don't know if you remember, is that we had also all the stuff that goes in a regular MOU in it. And we had to really say, like, that's not what this is for. If people do this really well, it can serve to help them create a strategic plan, or help them create a more formal MOU, or a more traditional kind of MOU. But the purpose of this is to start out the relationship in a way that helps you get the most out of your conversations, and out of your relationship. And so we played around with a bunch of different words, and the word that we kind of landed on, and maybe that I landed on, if you think it's weird, then you can attribute it to me. If you think it's perfectly reasonable, then you can attribute it to both of us. The word that I landed on was reciprocal, which is done, given, or felt equally by both sides, related to each other. And it's really about like reciprocity. There's a give and a take, and there's a deliberate sharing of power, and there's a deliberate sense of completion, or giving, or exchange. So that kind of foundation where we're going to be consistently giving and exchanging with each other is one that I wanted to try to get people to commit to really early on in a working relationship. So that's how we kind of ended up with reciprocal as the type of MOU that we're co-creating. I mentioned this a little bit when we started to think about the kind of reciprocal nature of collaborations. When you were thinking about creating this reciprocal MOU, how did you think that it might influence, or how did you think it might influence like future relationships that you have as invisible paradigms? Like, what was the impact that you were imagining that it could have for other people, to ask them to outline and to verbalize the stuff that's important to them?
Transparency. Transparency in a way that was more vulnerable, transparency in a way that was more new to people. So slowing down to say, what are your values? What common values do we want to have together? What values do we already share? I imagine this document, and through some of the partners that I have created this with, has been really powerful, because even co-creating is such a used term, or power sharing, like you just said, or reciprocity, which is all about, in some ways, equalizing or making it accessible for things to be given and taken at different levels. But I think for me, it came down to the opportunity for a prospective client to sit down with me and go through a document that was really intentional about asking questions around power, resources, values, statements of commitment, just for a short-term basis of creating work together. And my first instinct when we talked about the possibility of doing that was like, no one would want to do that, because there's such a norm about rushing through things or assuming, you know what I mean, right? Like I am anti-racist because I do this work and I have this value. And I think, that's the external part, but this MOU really walks through the internal conversations within a relationship, within a partnership, between a collaboration of a project. So there are questions in the MOU that specify and ask people in a vulnerable but transparent way, like, in what ways do you see power being between us? Do you see yourselves as equal? Do you see yourselves as different in power? And those aren't neutral questions, in the sense that they're good or bad, but they're not neutral because we're talking about and specifically asking people to think about power when it comes to organizational size, resource, influence, power when it comes to identities, history, experiences. Like Suraj and I have 5 years under my belt with In.Visible paradigms, but I feel like I'm being reborn right now in my business. And Suraj and I met when, right when Gramsci was starting around the pandemic. So there's inherent power differences in our business based on experiences. And I love that question to ask of relationships that you want to go, of partnering organizations that you want to go in deeper with to make that impact that you imagine, and asking them, do you see yourselves as equal? And when I've asked that in a partnering collaboration, it was so impressive, the conversation that came out of it, because it has also assuaged some of my own insecurities by having a conversation that I don't usually have, because I assume that I am different or that I am at a different path because I compare myself. We can't help to do that. So I think that's what's really powerful about this product, or like this. I think that's what's really powerful about this resource.
I totally agree. It didn't actually occur to me that this also can help kind of assuage some of those feelings that just come with unfamiliarity, or that come with newness, or that come with like just leftover detritus from bad previous like working relationships, that this can help sort of preempt some of those anxieties or some of that nervousness, or by having like that open conversation. You can, even though that's a big part of how this came to be, is like previous negative experiences, things that maybe could have been corrected if we had talked about them earlier. This does also have some component of preempting our like own negative self-talk, or stories that we might tell ourselves about a relationship that might not be how the other person in our collaboration or relationship is envisioning how the relationship's going. Sorry, I think that was just a really good point. I think that another part of this that is really helpful is that it really helps people co-vision, create collaborative visions of the future, and also encourages people to deliberately share power, because you can't share power if you don't acknowledge that you have any power to share. And so a big part of the Reciprocal MOU is identifying different types of power that each person in the relationship is holding. I say relationship a lot because for me, this really is about building a really strong relationship to build a really collaborative, successful product around, or outcome around. And so I think a big part of why we're having conversations about power sharing and creating a co-vision is in order to achieve certain outcomes. And so the point of the MOU isn't to be like, oh, we all love each other and now we're best friends. The point of the MOU is like, we were really honest with each other and we created shared goals, and we were able to achieve those shared goals and work towards this collaborative like vision of the future. I think that sometimes when people engage in processes like this, they think like, this is very wishy-washy. Or they imagine you like laying in a bed of like lavender or something, which is cool if you do want to lay in lavender to do the Reciprocal MOU, but that's not the point of the process. The point really is around like, how do we create the best working relationship so that we can achieve our shared goals in aid of our shared vision of the future, which hopefully, is an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, equitable, loving like vision of the future for sure. But I guess somebody could really use the Reciprocal MOU to only do evil if they wanted.
I don't know if that, I think that's an important piece too, is I'm going to take that note and just go a little left from that, is how do we end a relationship in the MOU? How do we decide look, it's been really great, sort of the
Mhm.
metaphor of the breakup. And I think you're not wrong to equate some relationship tenets or values or vocabulary, because often will see my intake calls like a dating call sometime. Like, are we a good match? Do you feel what I feel? I can do this. I'm excited to work with you. Let's try it for 6 months. Let's try it for one other call. I think there are some parts around finding connection that are universal in any type of relationship that I had. But what happens when a relationship, a collaborative partnership, or a organizational partnership stops being fulfilling, is not upholding the commitments that are stated, that we've joined together to outline, or that now starting to feel a little misaligned? Love to hear any thoughts or like answers you might have, Saraja.
I love how this episode has turned into like a metaphor for relationships. I think that first, I love that it has become a metaphor for relationships because I want to start by talking a little bit about ghosting. I feel like one of the things that happens in a relationship or a collaboration that we have started is that we don't create clear goals, or we don't create a clear end date, or we don't create a clear process for ending a relationship, or a collaboration or a contract. And so they kind of just end because one person just wanders off. Like one of the parties is like, oh, I have other stuff on. They kind of stop answering calls or emails, and then you just stop getting back to each other until you have just made other plans for your life. That's not a sustainable way to end a relationship in a collaboration, because it makes it really difficult to go back and draw more knowledge or share more resources or really do anything with that partnership again, because clear expectations weren't set. One of the parties is going to be left feeling like there was something that they did not get or receive. And so I think it's really important to think about, like, okay, what is a kind of clear end for what this relationship looks like? And also, what if I want to end this relationship early? Like, what if you mentioned this? Like, what if we've fallen out of alignment and it's irreparable? What if one person does decide to do evil, and so you're like, okay, this maybe isn't what we both signed up for. Maybe this is, I'm taking you as far as I can take you. Maybe this is, we've both outlived our usefulness to each other. How do you end the relationship? I think that the MOU speaks to that as well. The MOU speaks to this reciprocal MOU, I think, speaks to a lot of the kind of uncomfortable parts of a working relationship that we don't want to acknowledge. And I think that there is a lot of power sharing and ending something in a way that feels fair for everyone involved, and feels honest for everyone involved. And even if you don't get the outcome or goal that you were working towards, clearly communicating and having a process for exiting that relationship, I think, is really important. What about you? What do you think when it comes down to the end? to, to the end of a working relationship, what do you think is kind of the necessity? And then, yeah.
I think open communication is really clear for me to have as an ingredient to any relationship. I'm someone that processes internally and then processes externally, almost at the same time, of my experience of the relationship and then my observations in the moment. So open communication is important, and that can lead to, when there's misalignment, like you're saying, that can, for me, it leads to recognition and accountability. Accountability does not mean you are at blame necessarily, like the human in front of me is the problem, but rather when we're talking about the reciprocal MOU, I would suggest to talk about what accountability means, the fears, the excitement, the opportunity, because accountability is a conversation to recognize how we have stepped out of our commitment and the accountability to move back into that commitment, not necessarily as targeting and blaming the other person for everything. Individual behaviors should also be held accountable. I'm not excluding that, but that, I think, is still a conversation if you choose to have that. And if you want to practice having a conversation like that, it is worth to figure out, to then say, actually, X, Y, and Z, I can move forward, or something needs to change, we need to pause, or this is the end. And that's okay for relationships also to come to an end, both romantically, platonically, but in organizations. I have said no to prospective clients, and it has been the best thing. And I can imagine how differently my life and work ethic or energy would have been if I had chosen to go through a relationship with a client that felt annoying, or that felt not productive, or not impactful, or misaligned. So I think a conversation can lead to
I'm looking forward to learning and working with you too. I feel like that was one of the biggest joys.
I think a part of societal
creating
values,
the reciprocal MOU together was
either we go forward or we don't go at all.
Our collaboration,
or either we have
and I think our
collaboration
really informed our final product.
Anti-oppression is saying this is not an either-or situation. One of the principles is to be aware and remember
reciprocal MOU came into being,
certain things
how we kind of initially conceptualized this
and
project,
there's still value in that. And
sort of just the why it looks the way it looks, and what we hope,
what are you learning from this experience?
The components that we've selected, because it's not like we can cover everything that falls under our partnership, but we wanted to cover some essentials that would really influence your work.
Reciprocal MOU with yourself.
Why we chose those final kind of components that went into the reciprocal MOU.
A relationship. Absolutely. And I think let's begin with what a memorandum of understanding really is, because that was the template that we started, and it could be a small project. So an MOU, or it could be a really big thing. I have heard of this in my nonprofit experience by so many people that haven't still having experienced what an MOU is. Basically, it's a type of agreement between two or more, so it could be bilateral or multilateral parties.
I think that's really good advice.
To express a convergence of will between
just
parties.
for life,
meaning
just
we're
for
coming
life
together
generally.
Willingly to achieve
one
facts,
of the things
and these are the parameters of that.
And thinking
and
about
I was really struck
regarding fear
the
is
nature
kind
of
of
an
the fear
MOU
to
that
do
carries,
things differently in a way that you haven't done
I had
them
to
before.
do a little bit of an
I think that's one of the biggest asks of the reciprocal MOU is like, this is going to be maybe different than a process you've engaged in before.
It sounded like
and I think that part of this document is that we wanted to,
and to some extent,
think about work differently and working together differently and collaboration differently.
We want that, but we don't.
So that, I guess, is one of
when
one of
Suraj
our
and I was starting it, we didn't
like,
want
how
it to
does work
be
look different
just any MOU
anti-oppressive,
that you see out there,
anti-racist,
there are specific legal
society, etc.
clauses and blurbs
how do we
and sentences,
work differently?
I feel very intimidated whenever I look at those things. But we wanted an MOU
in our work.
that
I think the
was
reciprocal MOU is
about
like
a commitment,
one of those
about this
convergence
of people coming
that
together.
Future look different,
but offering what it means to come into a reciprocal relationship through our lenses and experiences in our identities.
Love that question. And I think that's always a guiding question. I go back to my values and see, reconnecting with them to see
with the hope and dream
how is this value,
this MOU is unlike any other that we've
creating relationships.
But that it is
so going back
fruitful
to
and
basics
generative
is one of
to
the ways. The other
gamut of
for
uncomfortable
is
to exciting conversation.
There is nothing
and discomfort in invisible paradigms
when there is an intentional
a catalyst for something.
As you're saying, to do
it's
things
not necessarily
to try, but also to do a retrospective.
Or
there's nothing wasted
that means that we need to stop something. So it's
to
always
take inventory of what you're learning
what about you,
in this moment and what you're going to do
I
in
think
the next
that
part. And
one of my
that,
experiences was in providing technical assistance to lots and lots of people who are doing violence prevention work. And as I was reading through people's MOUs and kind of helping people create MOUs, one of the things that I would think sometimes is like, this does not feel actionable. Like they have not shared enough information with each other to achieve the results that they're hoping for, which is like nobody growth is good growth. Like nobody wants to pour a lot of effort into creating a document together, only to find that you can't really serve each other's purposes or support each other in the way that you hope for.
This time, is that different for you? Are you holding someone accountable? One of the things that happened when
we first started making this, I don't know if you remember, is that we had also all the stuff that goes in a regular MOU in it.
How do you see yourself?
And we had to really say, like, that's not what this is for. If people do this really well, it can serve to help them create a strategic plan or help them create
have gotten to the end of a relationship.
More,
those are still change.
Formal MOU or a more traditional kind of MOU, but the purpose of this is to start out the relationship in a way that helps you get the most out of your conversations and out of your relationship. And so we played around with a bunch of different words, and the word that we kind of landed on, and maybe that I landed on, if you think it's weird, then you can attribute it to me. If you think it's perfectly reasonable, then you can attribute it to both of us. The word that I landed on was reciprocal, which is done, given, or felt equally by both sides, related to each other.
I think that you did,
and it's really about like reciprocity. There's a give and a take, and there's a deliberate sharing of power, and there's a deliberate
really brought me back to the relationship metaphor, because what is a reciprocal
completion
MOU
or giving or exchange? So that that kind of foundation where we're going to be consistently giving and exchanging with each other,
like my
is one that I wanted to try to,
and one thing that we do
every commit to
every year is that we reread our vows
in a working relationship.
And of course they're gonna change. Like we reread them and we're not like, oh, I'm holding you to that still, because some stuff might just be like different about our lives. But kind of a reminder of what are some of the things that we really valued in forming this relationship, and then how do we let that influence the work that we do in the future.
Yeah.
I think looking back always has value, in addition to having this like clear vision of the future. Looking back and learning and letting what we've learned inform our work is really deeply important. I think that was kind of the last bit of stuff that I wanted to cover for this conversation around sort of the origins of the MOU. Any last thoughts for the good of the land?
No, I feel complete both in our conversation and what's there. I think I can be very excited about like, oh, look at this. But I think part of this work and why we've chosen to do these few episodes is to just be your guide, to give you some behind the scenes, to point out important parts about this resource, but then to have you, the person listening, the person watching, the person interacting, people interacting with this document, to make it your own. You're bringing it out. You're bringing it to life differently than when Suraj and I completed it, or when other collaborative partners have. And I think that's so exciting, because we need different relationships converging to do the different areas of work around social justice and anti-oppression. So reach out. We're here to connect with you. Suraj and I are available for conversations, for bragging rights, but also, to help you go through that document. It's new, and that's okay that it feels a little different, and that's the point. But that would be my last thing to say.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the second iteration, folks. Thanks for tolerating a really long metaphor about relationships. We hope that you stick with us to the third episode, where we are going to be talking about the MOU itself. We're really going to be getting a little bit into the document, and hopefully you'll be
hitting us up with questions and suggestions for how we can make it better for you and your collaborations. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode, the third and final.
See you. Bye.